If you're a B2B founder or a sales leader thinking about starting a podcast, you've probably heard the same advice over and over again. Build an audience, be consistent, focus on downloads, monetize later. And to be fair, that advice isn't wrong. My own B2B podcast, Visionary Voices, has interviewed startup founders to billionaires. It's ranked across the UK, US, Canada, and a few other regions as well. From a content and ranking perspective, it's done amazingly well. But that's not where the real ROI came from. The biggest return didn't come from downloads or charts. It came from the conversations behind the podcast, the introduction calls, right? The relationships built before and after the episodes were recorded. And that's where the pipeline was created. And that's the part most B2B podcasts completely miss. Over the last few years, I've worked closely with dozens of B2B companies using podcasting as a growth channel. Consulting firms, SaaS companies, wealth managers, recruiters, and some of those clients have gone on to generate over 7 figures worth of opportunities just from their podcast alone. And I've also watched a lot of B2B podcasts quietly die after 6 or 7 episodes. Not because the content was bad, but because the podcast was treated just like a media project rather than a business development system. So in this video, I want to show you how to think about podcasting differently. I'll walk you through why most B2B podcasts never generate pipeline, even if the content is good, how to design a podcast so it creates real conversations from day one, how content and rankings still matter, but as a secondary layer that compounds over time. And when this model also makes sense for you when it comes down to your business and your goals, and when it doesn't. This isn't just a theory. This is based on patterns, and I've repeatedly seen this from my own podcast and from the clients using this system in the real world. If your goal is solely sponsorship, ads, becoming a media brand, then this probably isn't for you. But if your biggest bottleneck is access to the right decision makers, and you already know that you can help them once you're in the room with them, then this will change how you think about podcasting forever. So why do most B2B podcasts never generate any real business? There are millions of podcasts out there today. Most of them are entertainment, news, comedy, personal development. Only a small percentage are actually B2B focused. And the B2B podcasts that do exist, the vast majority are treated like content projects. They're optimizing for downloads, trying to grow an audience, and hoping someday that audience turns into revenue. That approach works for consumer media, but it does not work well for B2B. Because B2B growth doesn't come from scale, it comes from access and trust within our niche. So most B2B podcasts wait months before seeing any real business impact. They measure success by downloads instead of conversations and conversions, and they treat guests as content, not as potential clients or partners. They have no systematic way to book in the right guests and eventually stop because there's no clear ROI. The few that work treat podcasting very, very differently. They treat it as a relationship engine, not just a media play. And that difference completely changes the outcome as well. What are the 5 biggest mistakes B2B podcasts get wrong? So let me walk you through the core mistakes that kill most B2B podcasts. Mistake number 1 is waiting to build an audience before monetizing. In B2B, you don't need 10,000 listeners. You need 30 conversations with the right people. And most founders follow the consumer playbook: build first, monetize later, and that usually means 18 to 24 months before seeing any commercial return if it ever comes. The team that succeeds flip this. They generate the value first through the conversations and let the audience build as a byproduct. Now, mistake number 2 is focusing on downloads instead of conversations. Downloads are a vanity metric in B2B, right? I've seen podcasts with a few dozen listeners generate hundreds of thousands in pipeline, and I've seen podcasts with thousands of downloads generate nothing. The difference isn't content quality, it's who the conversations are with. Mistake number 3 is treating guests as content, not relationships. So most podcasters ask, will this make a good episode? The better question to ask is this someone I would want as a client partner or referral source? If the answer is no, then that guest probably doesn't belong on a B2B podcast designed for growth. Mistake number 4 is no outbound system. So waiting for guests to apply doesn't scale. Relying on only your warm network runs out very, very fast. And the podcasts that work have a deliberate outreach engine. They identify who they want to speak to and invite them on intentionally. Mistake number 5 is inconsistency. So inconsistent publishing kills momentum, not just for algorithms, but for you. So the podcasts that win commit to a cadence they can sustain and judge results after 90 days, not just 3 episodes. If you're making any of these mistakes, that is completely normal. The important thing is knowing what to do instead. So how can a podcast create ROI before episode 1 even goes live? Here's the model that changes everything. You don't wait for listeners. You invite your ideal clients as guests first. Think about it this way. If you could have 30-minute conversations with the top 50 dream clients over the next year, how valuable would that be? That's what a podcast gives you permission to do. Not because you're selling, but because you're offering them a platform. Here's a real pattern that we see all the time. A client launches a podcast. Before episode 1 even goes live, they have a very clear ideal client persona. They've built a targeted list of dream accounts. They've sent these thoughtful podcast invitations to those accounts. They've booked these intro calls. Those intro calls aren't sales calls, they're relationship conversations. They're you learning about them, about their role, their challenges, their priorities, and you're setting expectations for the podcast recording itself. Now, at the end of those calls, if there's some alignment, you offer something valuable, a framework, a resource, a short working session. And at the Pod.fm, we actually call this the next logical step. It's not a pitch and not a proposal, it's just value. And that's where pipeline starts to form, all before a single episode is published. And that's the inversion that most people miss. So why does traditional podcast advice fail for B2B? Most podcast advice is built for online consumer media. The model assumes that you have a large audience, that you want sponsorship revenue, and you have very long timelines to see ROI. B2B works completely differently. You don't need reach, you need relevance. You don't need virality, you need trust. And you don't need 10,000 listeners, you need the right 30 conversations that will attract even more of the right listeners. The relationship model creates value in weeks and not years like traditional podcasting ROI. And once you understand that, you stop worrying about the charts and downloads and metrics, and you just start focusing on the access that you get. So how do you build this profitable B2B podcast system for yourself? Here's the blueprint at a very high level. The first phase is the setup. So this is where you want to really build out all the foundational things. So who do you want to speak to? The problems that you want to talk about on this show, the brand as well. The brand needs to resonate with the ideal client persona, the basic technical setup. Now, all of this doesn't take months. It just takes a few weeks. Phase 2 is outreach. Now, this is where you identify a focused list of these target accounts that you want to go after. You send out personalized podcast invitations to these people. This isn't mass email and it's not generic messages. These are real invitations that explain why you want them on the show, and responses are much higher than traditional cold outreach and cold sales outreach because the framing is completely different. Phase 3 is the conversations. You start with a short intro call, and if they're qualified, then of course you move them to record an actual podcast conversation after that point. You need to make sure that on this episode, you're curious, it's insight-driven, and it's not salesy as well. Afterwards, you follow up thoughtfully, right? If there's commercial alignment, then the conversation happens naturally, and you don't do the selling on the podcast recording itself. Ultimately, you're there to create very good content and understand the guests that you have on. Why are podcast invitations so effective at starting conversations with our dream clients? Here's something that most people underestimate. Almost no one gets invited to talk about their career publicly. When you invite someone onto a podcast, you're signaling respect and status. You're not asking for something, you're offering something first. So it flips the power dynamic compared to traditional outbound. Execs are pitched constantly for services, but very few are actually invited to share what they've learned over 10 and 20 years of their career. And that's why response rates are just typically higher, and why follow-up conversations feel easier. So why is this system so hard to run properly on your own? Now, I want to be completely honest. This model works, but it's just not simple. To run this properly, you need to have targeting precision, outreach infrastructure, calendar coordination, recording and editing, content repurposing, follow-up systems, and that's a lot to manage while running a business as well, which is why most people either burn out or just stop too early. This only works when it's treated as a system and not just a side project. If you don't want to build all of this yourself, then that's exactly what we do here at the Pod.fm. There's a link below to book a short call, and we'll look at your ideal client persona, your sales cycle, and whether or not this system makes sense for your business. We've designed it so it takes roughly 30 to 60 minutes a week while handling both your business development and your content in the same workflow. And from there, you can decide if it's something you want to move forward with after that call. So how long does it take to realistically see any type of ROI from this? Let me set some more expectations here. The first month is, of course, setup. The second month is the conversations, and the pipeline starts forming in 60 to 90 days. Deals close on their own timeline depending on your sales cycle. The real compounding happens over months 6 to 12 as these relationships mature, and then the content also stacks up as well. This is not a hack, okay? It's a leverage system. So who is this actually for, and when should you not use this? So this works best if you sell high-value B2B services or software, trust and relationships matter the most, and access is your bottleneck. It doesn't work well if you have low-ticket transactional offers, high-volume B2C, commoditized products and services as well. So what's the right way to think about B2B podcasting in 2026? Here's the core idea I want you to remember. B2B podcasting isn't about building an audience. It's about building relationships that turn into pipeline and create authority building content as a secondary benefit. The teams that win don't just wait to be discovered. They invite the right people into the conversation first and then let everything else compound. So whether you work with us or not, design your podcast like a business development system, not just a content or media play. And if you do that, this becomes one of the highest ROI channels available to B2B teams today.